I wasn't planning to make this video because I wasn't even planning to see this movie since I knew full well that I wasn't going to like it, but I ended up seeing the movie and so now here we are. After I saw it, I kept thinking about it, not about the story or the characters since it barely has any of those, but I kept thinking about exactly why I disliked this movie so much, and so that's what I really wanted to get into here. When I made a post about the movie, somebody asked me why I saw it, which is a fair question since I've been vocal that I knew I wouldn't like this movie for over a year. I told this person that I suffered through the movie so that I could warn others, but that was sort of a lie. I didn't see this movie planning to warn anybody because when I saw the movie, I wasn't even planning to post about it because honestly, I was slightly ashamed of myself for going to watch it. These kind of crap Marvel movies are a huge part of what's wrong with the movie business these days to begin with, and the fact that people keep paying to see this crap is why things don't get any better. So the reason I still saw it anyway was because it's a Fantastic Four movie, and there will always be a part of me who is interested in that, whether I want it to be or not. The Fantastic Four were the first superhero comic I ever got, and they still might be my favorite superhero comic. When I was a little kid, my mom was very sensitive about what I watched and read, and she didn't want me to read superhero comics because she thought they were too violent. She didn't like teaching me that you solve your problems by punching people, and it turns out that she was right, that that's what superhero comics do teach a lot of people, which you can see in the arrested values that a lot of people today reading these comics have. But one day, it happened that my mom and my dad and I were taking a long road trip, and she told me that if I was good all day, I could pick out what I wanted when we stopped at a gas station. And that gas station that we stopped at had a rack of comic books. Maybe my mom was tired and didn't want to fight with me about it, or maybe she just thought it would be dishonest if she told me I could have what I wanted and then she wouldn't let me get a comic book. So either way, whatever the reason is, that day she gave in and she let me have a superhero comic book. I didn't know any of the characters at that point, but I thought it might be the only superhero comic I ever got if she went back to her old rules of not letting me buy them. So my strategy was that I just chose the one that was the biggest comic to maximize my opportunity, the one with the biggest number of pages. And that day, the biggest comic that they happened to have was the deluxe size anniversary issue, Fantastic Four number 358. That issue, it even had the rad die cut cover with the circle in the middle for the Fantastic Four. That's probably why still to this day I have a weakness for comics with gimmick covers and foil covers and embossed covers, all those stupid junk. I still love those. Fantastic Four 358 turned out to be an excellent choice. Being that it was an extra size anniversary issue, in addition to the lead story in the comic, it also had bonus material in the back. It had schematics of the Baxter Building, pictures of the Fantastic Four's Rogues Gallery, all this kind of stuff telling you about the history of the Fantastic Four. So this comic, it dropped me into this whole other world, all this history and everything. And then after that, a few months later, in issue number 362, they had a guest appearance by Spider-Man, and that led me on to start reading Spider-Man comics. And then, after that, I was done for it. I was a full-fledged addict. So I say all that to say that when I say this movie sucks, it's not because I hate the Fantastic Four. It's because I like the Fantastic Four as much as anybody, and this movie royally fucks them up. The MCU brand has been in decline recently, and their movies no longer have a guaranteed good box office return like they used to. So now what they're trying to do is tell you that each of their movies is somehow new and exciting and different because they figure out that people don't want more of what has already sucked for quite a while now. You can see the strategy in the laughable way that they tried to portray Thunderbolts as being some kind of edgy radical indie movie. And in this movie, they try to trick you into thinking it's some kind of different thing by adding a superficial veneer of some 60s nostalgia. I've talked in my videos before about how I think a lot of these superhero characters are very much tied to the eras in which they were created, and I think characters like Batman and Superman work best with the kind of 40s aesthetic and so on. So generally speaking, you would think a 60s set Fantastic Four movie would be a good idea, but of course they can't even commit and do that right. It's not a sincere effort, it's an affectation. The characters do and say a million things in this movie that would be anachronistic in the 60s. Nobody working on this movie had any meaningful understanding of the period or any deep interest in making something really in that spirit, and this movie ultimately is the exact same formula as every other Marvel movie. The fact that this movie is conceived and constructed like every other Marvel movie is what makes it impossible for it to do anything worthwhile from the beginning, from conception. There's a rot in the way the corporate lackeys running these things think about movies and think about art that eats the soul of every single thing that they touch. This movie somehow manages to fuck up and miscast basically all of the characters. They're all too old for one thing. Johnny Storm is supposed to be a brash, young, girl-crazy kind of guy, He's a teenager at the start of the comics. If you take that and transplant it onto an actor who's 30, none of the personality really makes sense anymore. It's just kind of sad and weird. You combine that with the fact that they're afraid of it appearing sexist to have him chase after women now, and suddenly Johnny's left with basically no personality. And, Joseph Quinn, he's an attractive enough man, but whatever they were trying to do with bleaching his hair and everything to make him resemble Johnny Storm is a disaster. A lot of people complained about them making the Silver Surfer a woman, but I think it's much more of a problem if they turned Johnny Storm into an Ellen DeGeneres-style lesbian. And like everybody else, I'm sick of seeing Pedro Pascal in every single movie and franchise, but I don't think he's such a terrible actor. If you've ever heard him talk in an interview, though, then you know that him trying to play a genius is way too much of a stretch. And unlike Mr. Fantastic's stretching abilities, the character being smart is something that they couldn't add to Pascal with CGI. He's just fully incapable of playing it. And he's also fully twice as old as the character is supposed to be. Vanessa Kirby is mostly just a blank slate as Sue Storm, but I guess it's not really her fault since they didn't bother to write a character for her to play. She's also too old for the part at age 37, which, it's not sexism. I don't think Sue should be young just because I want some younger, sexier actors. I'm saying that all of these actors are too old. She's still 13 years younger than Pedro Pascal, though, so in the casting decisions, I think they probably were being sexist by trying to get the youngest woman that they possibly could to play the wife of a 50-year-old. They wanted her to be as young as they could without going so young that it would cause an inordinate amount of backlash. Eben Moss-Bachrach is also too old, but he's playing a CGI character, so I guess in his case it doesn't matter so much. Either way, though, they still managed to get his character all wrong, just like the other ones. Ben Grimm is supposed to be tortured about being a Thing because of his hideous appearance. Here, nobody seems scared of the Thing or repulsed by his appearance or even fazed by how he looks. And he's this carefree wisecrack machine like every other character in these shitty Marvel movies that all have their interchangeable personalities. The story here is the real problem, as in every Marvel movie. If you look at these things in a structural way and try to analyze them...
Now, these are eyes that analyze movies.
You can see the fundamental rot at the way that the MCU movies are constructed. If you try to look at how the movie progresses from one scene to the next and the overall journey that the story supposedly is trying to take you on, you can see that the structure of these movies always falls apart. The pieces don't add up or make sense for what the scenes are supposed to be doing. One scene doesn't lead to the next scene in a way that makes any sense to what's supposed to be happening in the scenes. You'll be told a scene is about one thing and that you're supposed to be feeling a certain way, but what's actually in the scene and what actually happens with the characters doesn't align with what it's, ostensibly supposed to be about. This is because of how these movies are conceived. In the sausage factory way that the MCU cranks this trash out, they'll plan the movie's action scenes and set pieces and character designs before the movie has a director or even a screenwriter attached. Several of the directors who have worked on these movies have said that they were told, don't worry about the action scenes, the quote-unquote director won't even be involved in those. Those scenes and a lot of other important decisions about the movies, like which characters will appear in the movie, these things are all decided by toy companies and marketing people years before they bother to hire a director or a writer who they just view as an afterthought to their business plan. So when they do finally bother to getting around to getting a director and a writer, the job of the director and the writer is to try to retroactively patch together some kind of story that strings together all the set pieces and all the decisions that somebody else made that they're stuck with. All these things were predetermined before they ever got hired. And it's not always possible to string these things together into any kind of meaningful, cohesive arrangement. It can't have any emotional weight because anything meaningful with the characters or the plot aren't the reason that the big story beats are happening. They're happening because Hasbro or some other licensed merchandise company had a gap in their release schedule and a price range of a toy that they'd like to sell people. You can see the result of that in how utterly stupid that this movie's central conflict is. By the way, from here we're gonna get into spoilers, so spoilers, spoiler alert, but a big part of the problem with this movie is how utterly predictable everything is, so nothing I spoil will probably ruin much in the movie for you if you're actually paying attention to the movie at all when you watch it. But anyway, in the movie, Galactus offers to spare Earth if Reed and Sue give him their baby, Franklin. Now, obviously, the heroes in a superhero movie like this would fight to defend their baby. It would be really bad optics if they handed over their baby to the bad guy, of course. But the way the conflict is constructed in the movie, they're presented with the chance to save an entire planet by sacrificing one life, and their decision not to do it actually isn't heroic at all. It's actually morally bankrupt. I mean, yeah, giving up their child is horrible. Most people would say they could never do it and they'd rather die than give up their child. But these characters aren't just sacrificing their own lives. These characters are choosing to sacrifice 8 billion other lives just to save their own baby. I mean, that makes them mass murderers. Now, of course, in a superhero story like this, they don't usually deal with moral quandaries in a realistic way, and a situation like this is structured so that the heroes end up finding a solution where they would both, save the baby and also save the planet. But you have to actually structure the story that way. It doesn't just happen on its own. You have to create an option where that makes sense. The way it happens in the movie is that at first Reed has no plan at all to save the 8 billion people on Earth, and then he has several very stupid harebrained plans that are probably worse than no plan at all. First, he decides he wants to build some kind of crazy teleportation machine to teleport the entire planet someplace far away, where even though Galactus found us here, he somehow thinks if he transports us someplace else, Galactus won't be able to find us again. I mean, are you fucking kidding me? He wants to teleport the entire planet? I mean, what if that doesn't work? What if it short circuits and erases the entire planet? And what if everybody doesn't want to be transported to some new unknown solar system where God knows what could be waiting for them? 8 billion people are supposed to be okay with doing this just to save like one fucking baby? It's completely nonsensical. And then even when Reed fucks up that plan and they can't teleport, they come up with another harebrained scheme to try to trick Galactus with an empty bassinet, painting a fake tunnel on a wall to trick Wile E. Coyote. I mean, of course, this plan works because of plot armor, but when Galactus shows up, he still smashes through half of Manhattan, knocking down whole city blocks. I mean, even if you're really supposed to believe that they somehow managed to evacuate every man, woman, and child from Manhattan, the property damage alone makes it kind of indefensible that they did this to save one baby. I mean, in the movie, Reed doesn't even try to find a way to do this in an unpopulated area. He just does a teleportation machine and a fake bassinet, like right in the middle of downtown New York. I mean, because of course they wanted it there so that the movie could have a scene of Galactus coming in and smashing buildings like Godzilla. But, again, this is Reed being a mass murderer just because the movie wanted to have a set piece of Galactus smashing buildings. And I mean, even if you're supposed to imagine that they did evacuate every man, woman, and child from Manhattan and nobody died, this is still kind of indefensible just to save one baby. Because, I mean, how many people lost their homes and lost their livelihoods for this one baby? I mean, I'm sure maybe some of them would have said, yes, I'd be willing to lose my house and lose my city to save your baby. But it's not like Reed surveyed all of these people and let them make that decision. He just unilaterally makes this decision. Decisions like this throughout the movie that affect millions of people. He just makes decisions for the whole planet just on his own, which kind of makes him come off like some kind of fascist playing God, which is the exact thing that we're supposed to consider Galactus a bad guy for doing. Even aside from the fact that you could excuse the property damage and the questionable ethics with the fact that, okay, this is just a superhero comic and it's not supposed to be dealing with these things in a realistic way, the problem is that these plot problems make it so that nothing can work emotionally. They started with this plot idea of Galactus trying to get the baby, and then they had to work backward to try to find a story explanation for why Reed and Sue wouldn't just give him the baby. And so they give Sue this big speech that's supposed to be rousing about how she'll never give up and never give up her baby, and people watching her cheer because that's what the script tells them to do, and they act like what she's doing is heroic because that's how the script tells them to act. But really, this is a woman that just got up there and she's telling the whole world, hey, I don't care if all of you die because I care about my baby more, and if the shit hits the fan, I know that I can just get in a spaceship and leave this planet, so fuck you, suckers. Everything about the movie structurally undermines itself like this. The whole movie they tease, gee, I wonder if Franklin has any superpowers, since he hasn't shown any of his powers yet, and Galactus says that he wants Franklin for his powers, but Reed and Sue are like, no, we did all the tests. Franklin doesn't have any superpowers, so theoretically the audience is supposed to be wondering at this point, like, gee, I wonder if Franklin has superpowers. What a mystery. What could it be? But again, this doesn't work structurally, because as a viewer, you know that Galactus wouldn't want him, much less be willing to give up a whole planet for him if he didn't know already for a fact that Franklin has these powers. So it's not actually a question of whether or not Franklin has powers. Instead, you're just kind of sitting around and waiting for the inevitable scene when his powers show up and everybody's going to act surprised, even though anybody watching the movie already knew that this was coming an hour ago. So then in the big end battle scene, right, Sue is trying to push Galactus into the wormhole or whatever with her force field, and the effort is obviously straining her, and there's supposed to be tension like, oh no, will she be able to do it? Except of course she'll be able to do it, because if she couldn't do it, then there wouldn't be a fucking movie. So, then she does it when you already knew that she was going to be able to do it, but the strain of it doing it makes her fall down, and the other characters come over and they all fawn over her and act like she died, and you're supposed to be like, oh no, did she die? As soon as you see her straining and they make it like, oh, the strain is hurting her, then that they're going to do the thing where she falls down and you think that she's dead for a minute, but she's not dead. Of course she can't die. Of course she can't die, because this is a franchise opener and she's part of the main team. She wouldn't be here if they weren't establishing her for subsequent movies. So the question just becomes not whether she's dead, it just becomes how will they bring her back after the fake death. And so, unless you're really thick, that's not a mystery mystery either, because they already telegraphed the whole entire movie that at some point Franklin, right, is going to suddenly reveal that he has powers. So as soon as Sue starts straining to push Galactus and it becomes clear they're going to do the whole pretending she's fake dead scene like in 1,000 other movies, as soon as that whole bit starts, if you haven't fallen asleep already, and if you know that 1 and 1 makes 2, then you also already know that the big reveal of Franklin's powers is going to be that when Sue looks dead, Franklin's going to save her, right? Obviously. It's impossible for there to be any other resolution to the scenario that they're setting up. So instead of any tension or surprise for this whole entire stretch of the movie, you're just kind of sitting there and waiting for the moment that you already know is going to happen. These poor actors are all sitting there over Sue's body and doing their best to make the characters look like they're stupid enough to believe that Sue's actually dead. And then they do this big scene where the baby wants to see her and the baby's supposed to look sad, and the people working on this movie actually think that you're stupid enough to think that she's dead and to feel sad for the baby losing his mother, you know, and you're supposed to think that that's what the scene is about, like, oh no, it's so tragic, as if you don't know the reason that they're trying to get the baby on top of Sue so that they can do the next bit. The whole time, like 5 or 10 minutes of this movie now, you're just checking your watch and waiting for the fucking baby to turn on his fucking powers and save her, like every single person already knows that he's gonna do. It's the only way that they can resolve what they set up. It's not a good setup if the resolution is supposed to be a surprise, but there's only one possible resolution, so it can't possibly be a surprise. But this is what happens when they start with the crap and then they work their way backward to try to build a story up around the crap. You can see the rickety architecture of the scaffolding that they've tried to erect to cover up something that's ultimately fundamentally hollow at its core. And as long as Marvel movies are made the way that they are, with the artists and creative people just treated as an afterthought and an arm of the marketing department, then that's the only thing that these movies ever can be and the only thing that they ever will be.